G'day and welcome to 25 Frames. This week we are going to be talking to probably one of Australia's most recognised leading animators, Adam Elliott, who you may know from seeing some of his films, three of which are probably really well known, Uncle, Cousin and most recently Brother, which are short claymation films that he's made. And so we're going to be talking to him about this. Thank you, Adam, for joining us today.
Thanks, Travis. Good to be here.
Yeah, on a lovely sunny day, even though it's freezing.
It's -10, yeah.
Now tell me, how did you actually start into animation? How did that come about for you?
Well, I was an illustrator, freelance illustrator, for about 5 years after I did my HSC, and I was actually I spent every Sunday down at the St Kilda Craft Market selling T-shirts, hand-painted T-shirts, and you know, that was great, but after a while I thought I'd really like to move on and do something else, so I went to the VCA Open Day, and I'd always had an interest in animation, but never really thought I was going to end up being an animator. Yeah. So I enrolled and I did the 1 year postgraduate diploma in animation there, and I thought that I'd become a 2D animator. I had never touched plasticine, I'd never made a model, but halfway through the course the lecturers convinced me that I should really pursue model animation, so I did.
So how did you get from, when did you actually first make Uncle?
Well, Uncle was my student film. Every student has to make a short film under about 10 minutes, so I chose to make one based on all my uncles. I've got 8 uncles, or 7 now, and so I just wrote this little short biographical piece about him, and I never anticipated that it would be part 1 of a trilogy. Yeah. So when I made Uncle, I thought I'll enter it into a few festivals here and there, and so I entered in St Kilda, and I thought, oh, that's great, I got into the St Kilda Film Festival. And I thought that would be it, and I didn't think the film would translate overseas, or whether American audiences will get it or whatever. Yeah. But within 6 months it just snowballed, and 186 film festivals later, it's still going into film festivals now. It's amazing.
My cousin had cerebral palsy. When I went around to play, he'd be waiting there by the letterbox in one of his superhero outfits his mum had made. He'd give me a big hug and leave a little dribble on my shoulder. And for some reason, he always smelt of licorice. The first thing he'd do was dress me up as a superhero as well. My auntie would take a photo of us and then make him take his pills. He took 3 little blue ones and 2 big grey ones, which he'd gulp down without any water. He told me they gave him superpowers, and he'd tried to prove it by dragging me onto the chook shed roof where we'd attempted to fly. He had a lot of pets. He'd show me his new ones and where he'd buried the old ones. I was jealous of all the things he had. I thought he was spoiled. He sat down when he did a wee. Mum said he was allowed to. His left arm wasn't attached to his brain. It floated around and had a mind of its own. Sometimes my auntie would pin it to his side to help control it. His other arm was very strong. Playing cricket with him was dangerous. Once he swung the bat so hard it flew and hit my uncle in the neck, and he had to wear a neck brace for a month. Sometimes we'd play in the street. He had an old shopping trolley we'd roll in down hills. And one time a gang of kids tried to get it from us. One of them called my cousin a spazzo and mimicked him. My cousin broke his finger, and he ran off screaming. My cousin thought it was funny. But he didn't always laugh. He'd often get angry, frustrated and violent, screaming and flinging himself about. Once I watched him punch a hole in the wall, but my auntie knew what to do. She'd grab him, look him in the eyes and say, "Bake a cake." He'd calm right down and begin to measure pour and mix, waiting for the best bit at the end, when he could decorate however he liked. He had to be occupied. He liked collecting things and counting them. He had 34 T-shirts and had a favourite. He made pet rocks and named them after people he knew. He was very creative. And if he wasn't drawing, he'd be putting together jigsaw puzzles or playing board games. Once he ate the letter E. E is for eat, he said. But the thing he liked doing more than anything else was swimming. He liked to sink to the bottom, and everyone was unsure whether he was drowning. I think things were better down there. On my 8th birthday, his parents were killed in a car accident, and he was moved to a foster home in another state. Over the years, I talked to him whenever I could, but we grew older and slowly lost contact. I think I saw him the other day at a shopping centre, collecting trolleys. But I didn't go up to him, I just watched him moving about, hoping he was happy, and wondering if he still smelt of licorice.
I say that they're works of fiction, but they are pretty much based on my family. I do have a cousin who has cerebral palsy, and my brother did have asthma, and but you know, they're probably 80% true. Like, for example, in Brother, my dad was an acrobatic clown, but he's not a paraplegic, and he's not an alcoholic. And my mum does cut people's hair in the nursing home. That's what she does for a living, but she's not a chain smoker. So I mean, it's a little bit of, you know, I stretch things, and I have artistic license, and you know, I don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. That's basically my little motto.
Absolutely.
But no, they're biographical. They don't have real plots really. They're just, and they're all narrated from beginning to end. So they're sort of comedy tragedies, you know. They're characters that people can relate to. And I don't try and set them in a specific time. They're not in the 80s or the 90s. They're just sort of somewhere in the last 30 or 40 years. And I try and make them poignant without being over sentimental.
I was brought up in the suburbs, in a small red house, under power lines, with my mum, my dad, my brother, and our bird, Jeanette. Dad used to be an acrobatic clown with my uncle. They were called the Flying Trapinos and toured the world, until my uncle slipped on his own swift, and Dad became a paraplegic, then slowly an alcoholic. Mum cut the old people's hairs at the local nursing home, and on Saturdays sold pies at the football. My brother was a year older than me, and for a while had to have the lens of his glasses blacked over to let his other eye catch up. He also had asthma and had to carry his spray around with him all the time. Mum tied it around his neck because he was always losing it. We did everything together. On Saturday mornings we'd watch hours of cartoons and eat honey on toast. We'd then run into the backyard to swing on the clothesline or kick the football at Dad's undies. We'd chase the chooks or burn insects with a magnifying glass. When we ran out of things to do, my brother would pinch money from Dad's wallet while he was asleep and leave a peppermint on his tongue. We'd then jump on our bikes and go down to buy lollies from Ruby's shop. Ruby was old and short-sighted. She had purple hair and big twisted veins on the back of her legs. I remember how her nipples poked out and looked like big walnuts. While she counted our lollies, my brother would try and steal something, anything. Once he took a pair of pantyhose which he threw in the creek on the way home. Sometimes we'd visit Mum at the football and collect cans for money. My brother also collected cigarette butts and had 2 ice cream containers full of them. On the way home we'd try and find some fresh concrete to write our names in. We never put our last name. My brother put other people's names, and even their phone numbers. If it was raining, we'd stay inside and draw. He was great at drawing. He drew all sorts of things. I remember a picture he drew of us standing by the letterbox. He didn't give me any arms. We also played with my brother's lizard Beef. Beef lived in his room and ate dead flies off the windowsill. Sometimes we'd feed him snails to eat as well. On Saturday nights, we'd have to have a bath together. Once my brother did a poo and was sent to bed without any baked beans. Sometimes I wish I was sent to bed without neither, especially when Mum cooked tongue. She said if we didn't eat our tongue, we'd be sent to a boys' home in the country where they'd shave our heads and make us eat tongue every day. At school, my brother got the blame for everything. He got blamed for doing a noise with his armpit. And he wasn't even there. He was at home with the chicken pox. His best friend was Matthew Welch. Matthew Welch could turn his eyelids inside out and drink milk through his nose. Once they got caught trying to smoke a tea bag behind the bike shed. My brother's face went all white, and he threw up his play lunch. My brother worried me. Often I'd go and visit Mr. Stewart next door, where he had macrocephaly, which made his head really big. We'd sit for hours talking. I asked him if my brother would go to hell. Only prostitutes and accountants went to hell, he said. But a thing called karma might get him. And he was right. Karma gave my brother nits. The nurses found them when they came to school to check our heads. He had to wait outside the sick bay to be sprayed, while all the other kids walked past and laughed. Nit kids were like the lepers. A boy in the grade above me said that I had nits too, and that I'd got them off my stinking, drunk dad. He squashed his bubble gum into my hair and pushed me into the girls' toilets. When my brother found out, he punched him in the eye and was suspended for a week. He didn't look for trouble. It seemed to find him. One of his chores was to bring Jeanette in at night and put a blanket over a cage. Once he forgot, and Mum found her the next morning, frozen to a perch. We had a funeral beside the compost, and everyone cried. Despite his problems, my brother struggled on and actually had a dream. He wanted to be an acrobat like Dad and would spend hours in the backyard practicing with Dad on the side, coaching through blurred eyes. One morning, I went into my brother's room to tell him about a colouring competition. He was lying, all still. He'd had an asthma attack. I sat and stared at him for a long time before I went and got anyone. His room was all quiet except for the sound of his lizard eating a fly. Memories of you I will always keep. God saw you were tired and put you to sleep.
Adam, you're actually a bit of a bent filmmaker yourself, and you have actually had your films in quite a few gay festivals, queer, or, gay and lesbian types of festivals. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, it's funny, when I made Uncle and Cousin Brother, none of the 3 films have any gay content, And so when I started entering film festivals, I didn't think that my films would be eligible, especially, and I was actually ignorant as to what the criteria was for gay and lesbian film festivals. But I soon found out, especially internationally, that you don't have to have gay content. All you need to be is a gay director or writer or whatever. And now it's amazing. I have one print specially designated for gay and lesbian film festivals. It's just travelling through at the moment, and I just haven't seen that print for months. It just goes from one festival to the other. But it all started with the Sydney Film Festival approaching me and saying, we'd love to show your films. And I said, well, my only experience was from the Melbourne Film Festival, which actually does require gay content, whereas Sydney doesn't require gay content. So I didn't know that. But they approached me and said, we'd love to show your films, and we have a competition for short filmmakers. And I've won it 3 years in a row now, and I think I get really nervous when I go up there for the awards presentation, because really my film's about the only one that doesn't have gay content, and it's about the only one that's animated. So I feel like a minority in a minority in a minority, and hated by all these other filmmakers, But it's great. I just love that animation gets acknowledged, The
first time I met my uncle was when my father took me to see him at his hardware shop. He was cleaning his pipe with the pipe cleaners. He bent one into the shape of a spider and gave it to me. I thought it was great. A few months later, he retired after selling his 1 millionth nail. My uncle was married to my aunt. They never had any children, and so I became a sort of surrogate. In the evenings, my uncle would show me his History of War volumes, while my aunt made shell people for her Sunday craft stall. And I remember a picture of a soldier being bayoneted through the throat, his helmet spilling off. My uncle said that in times of need, saucepans could double as helmets. When I was older, my aunt drank ant poison and died, leaving my uncle with no one to talk to. He never remarried and said he never felt lonely because he had Reg, his chihuahua. Once when I visited, I found him talking to religious salesmen. He told me not to worry. He always invited them in because he enjoyed the friendly advice. He was very tolerant, although he hated snails. On winter mornings, he'd be down by the letterbox, removing them and crushing them with a brick. My uncle spent most of his retirement in his shed and backyard. He had a lemon tree he said was the best in the street because he'd wee on it every full moon. When it was grown, he put fairy lights in its branches. He also had an incinerator in which he enjoyed burning things. Once he ignited a tire. He'd soaked it with lawnmower fuel, and when he lit it, the burst of flame singed his hair into little balls. He didn't eat very well. He thought a good meal was one he could shape into a smiley face. His favourite food was a crumpet, which he often had a battle with toasting. He'd complain it would either glide to the surface an hour later, lily-white, or leap into flames onto the floor, be bashed with a broom, then scraped of its crumpet into the sink. I showed him the knob on the side, but he believed it wasn't connected to anything. Every Christmas we had him over for lunch. I always had to sit next to him and had to endure his rumbles coming from his colostomy bag. He'd dress up as Santa. He'd made the beard himself out of cotton wool and pipe cleaners. One year it fell to bits, and he raced from the room. He returned, and it was mended with Band-Aids. We pretended we really thought he was Santa. One evening I found him in his shed. He'd been crying. I sat with him, and he began to tell me things.
You know, life can only be understood backwards, but we have to live it forwards. Most important things in life are simple pleasures, like a cup of tea in the morning, a hug before bedtime, growing a tree, and a friendly dog.
One day my mother phoned to tell me that Reg had been run over by a kid on a skateboard, and that my uncle had buried Reg under the lemon tree. He was never the same after that, and it wasn't long before they took him away, when my cousin had found him rolling on the floor with both legs in one pyjama trouser. He moved to the Ashburn Gentleman's Hospice, where he slowly got used to his bedmates, as well as the mixed smell of flowers, roast dinners, and urine. I called in to see him a few times, bringing him a flask of whiskey to hide under his pillow. On one visit, I found him attaching a piece of string to his pyjamas, the other end to his false teeth. He said it was to stop other patients from stealing them. In the sunroom one morning, he died. The nurses found him with a cup of tea in one hand and a crumpet in the other. And his last words were to his religious friends who paid a visit.
Short filmmaking here is sort of seen as a stepping stone to making a feature, and that it's a short film is sort of like your business card. Yeah. Whereas in Germany and France, it is an art form in its own right, just like sculpture or any sort of other art form. Yeah. So yeah, it is hard to come back to Australia, and you know, people think you're just people here think that what I do is a hobby, and I just do it on my weekends, and you know, and they cost $100 to make, and my films cost about $55,000 each to make. Wow. And so it's just all encompassing. It just takes up all my time to be a filmmaker.
In terms of making animations, is it hard to actually get funding, or is that something that you're finding is slowly changing now, or?
Yeah, it's very competitive, and it's very, just to be a filmmaker trying to get money from the government. I mean, we're lucky in Australia that we do have financial support from the government, because a lot of other countries don't. But it's very competitive. Once you get the money, it doesn't go very far. We don't get fantastic wages. And you always, if it worked out an hourly rate, I'd probably be getting $1 an hour or something.